This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
significant and protracted
political theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. Yes, I know that the official start of summer is the solstice in June, but let's be honest, Memorial Day is when summer really starts, and Labor Day is when it really ends. And that brings us to today's podcast, where Jacob Rubashkin, our good friend and our colleague, the deputy editor at Inside Elections, is going to discuss what we think will be some of the biggest political news of the real summer, the Memorial Day to Labor Day connection. Jacob, welcome back to Political Theater.
It's so great to be here.
Yeah, I feel like this, there are various stages of summer, right? and yes, it does officially begin on the solstice in June, June 21st. But really, I mean, all you have to do is walk outside and realize we're in summer right now. I mean, this isn't spring, right? This is late spring, early summer. I think that Memorial Day to Labor Day thing, that's kind of deep summer, right? I mean, that's like that's as summery as you get. That's when people get their lifeguarding jobs when they're teenagers, things like that. Even though, some schools still aren't out and blah, blah, blah. But this is summer. And I feel like this is the good time to talk about the summer because we have so much going on, conventions and more primaries and Supreme Court opinions and all that kind of stuff. People on trial, including former presidents and sitting senators. So let's get into it. Let's talk about, let's start with our favorites, the Congress, like the news that's going to, some of the biggest news that will affect members of Congress in congressional elections. And I know you probably want to start with one man, and that's
Bob Menendez.
Yay! I knew it. Let's start with Senator Bob Menendez and his trial in federal court on corruption charges.
Yeah, this is the big story of the day. Well, I mean, candidly, it's not even the biggest story of the day in the New York courthouse, but for Senate purposes, right? This is big news. It's not often that you get a sitting senator brought up on a whole array of bribery charges. It's happened to Menendez twice, so he's got I don't know if he's the first senator in however long to face two federal corruption trials, one after another. Normally you only get one, but I think this is going to play out over the next couple weeks. The trial has started, and
he's already blamed his wife.
He has already blamed his wife. We could see that coming from a mile away, but I think that the biggest impact of all the legal trouble that's going on now happened last year with Andy Kim getting in the race and Tammy Murphy getting in the race and then dropping out of the race, and Menendez not running in the Democratic primary. So, I think the indictments really did a number on him politically. And now the big outstanding question, I guess there are two big outstanding questions. The first is, if he's convicted, does he resign? Or does the Senate have to expel him potentially? And who gets the seat for the next couple months? It's not a full term, but being
I hear
a senator,
Bob Torricelli is available. Is that are we just gonna put that, the torch, the great comeback for the torch, or we're just gonna put that out there, whether it's true or not?
Yeah, we can start that rumor. Gosh, I mean, there are Corzine's looking there saying, if he can do it, why can't I?
It's about time. I mean, Ted Cruz shouldn't be the only man with a beard in the United States Senate. We can bring Corzine back, right?
Oh, absolutely. He and Murphy go back to their Goldman days. I think it.
It's just the image the Democratic Party wants, like two guys from Goldman Sachs, holding statewide office.
There are a lot of different directions he could go, and Murphy if he gets to fill that vacancy. But the other interesting possibility, of course, is if Menendez is not found guilty, either if he's acquitted or, like last time, if there's a mistrial.
Or a hung jury, right? Yeah.
Or a hung jury, right? I mean, that was how he skated by in 2017. He has said when he proves his innocence, that he may run as an independent, which probably wouldn't change the overall shape of the New Jersey Senate race, because the state is sufficiently Democratic that even with Menendez running as an independent, there still should be enough room for Andy Kim to win without too much trouble. But maybe, right, you can see a universe in which a Menendez candidacy that grabs 10% of the vote, takes what is a 57-40 state typically into a 47-40 state. And all of a sudden that's, maybe a race that Democrats have to look a little bit at. Whereas right now it looks like a slam dunk for Andy Kim. So
yeah, it does get into that like category of things Democrats didn't think they had to worry about, like Maryland, right?
Exactly.
Maryland is something they have to pay attention to, even if the voting rolls and it's the fact that it's a presidential election, gives them an inherent advantage, as any kind of generic Democrat would win over a generic Republican. But the fact that Larry Hogan, who people don't seem to hate, former Republican governor, is running as a Senate candidate, it means that they have to pay attention and they have to be ready in case things start to really go sideways, which we're still 6 months out, or a little less than 6 months, but there's a lot that can happen, which we're discussing on this podcast.
Yeah, I think Larry Hogan's kind of the anti-Bob Menendez in that everybody likes Larry Hogan. Nobody likes Bob Menendez in New Jersey anymore. But certainly both unexpected. I think the best case scenario for Democrats was Bob Menendez resigned 6 months ago when he was indicted.
Right.
The second best case is probably he's convicted and he resigns and they don't have to think about him anymore. And then it gets worse from there.
Right. Let's talk about some primaries that so we have some pretty high profile, particularly Senate Republican primaries coming up. One conveniently in each month of this summer, sort of tranche. And the first one is coming up in the Silver State, Nevada, the Battleborn State. I don't know, like which one do you prefer, Battleborn or Silver State?
I go Silver typically. Fewer syllables.
Battleborn seems like they're just trying a little too hard. It seems a little much. Anyway, June 11th is the congressional primary date. Obviously, earlier this year they had their presidential, preference, contests, but and no surprise, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are going to be leading the ticket in their respective tickets in Nevada. But in particular, Jackie Rosen, the incumbent Democratic senator in Nevada, is vulnerable. Trump is polling very well in Nevada. Nevada has been a swing state for a long time, even though it has tended to go Democrats' ways the last few years, particularly at the Senate and presidential level. So let's talk about the two Republicans who are leading polls for the right to take on Jackie Rosen on June 11th. And again, early voting has already started, so it's not like that's just the one day. But who are those Republicans and what is their outlook?
And I would, to be fair to the first Republican I'll mention, Sam Brown, I think it's not two Republicans so much as two very distinct tier of Republicans in this primary. You've got Sam Brown. He's a retired Army captain who was grievously wounded in Afghanistan. He ran for Senate in 2022 in the Republican primary. He was the anti-establishment choice there, running against Adam Laxalt, and put together a pretty decent performance against a guy who had served statewide before and had endorsements from both Trump and Mitch McConnell. Sam Brown won, I want to say, upwards of 30% of the vote against Laxalt, and he's back again. This time he is the more establishment pick. He's got backing from the NRSC. He has more money. He's got a supportive super PAC. You've also got a physician named Jeff Gunter, who is the former ambassador to Iceland under the Trump presidency. He had a pretty tumultuous tenure as ambassador, some embarrassing stories. I believe during COVID, he refused actually to go to Iceland. He wanted to be ambassador from I believe Lake Tahoe is where he was living at the time. And they had to dispatch Mike Pompeo, who was Secretary of State at the time, to basically read him the Riot Act and say, get your stuff together. You're on a plane to Reykjavik. You can't be the ambassador to Iceland via Lake Tahoe.
These kids and their remote work requirements.
Exactly. So he is also in the race. He has a little bit of personal money, so he wrote himself a check for $2 million to run TV ads against Sam Brown, or Scam Brown, as he likes to call him. The only real polling that we have out of the state right now comes courtesy of Brown and his allies, which of course shows Brown well ahead, but Gunter gaining a little bit of ground as he has spent a bunch of money on TV. I think that the expectation here is that Brown is the nominee, and it remains to be seen just how much Jackie Rosen can overperform Joe Biden. If you believe the polls now, Joe Biden is going to lose the state by a whole bunch, and Jackie Rosen's going to win the state by a bunch, which is not what we see typically in Senate races these days, but that's what the data suggests.
Yeah, I've struck by how weird and unpredictable Nevada polling is. I mean, for years, the Democratic machine, was run through one man, Harry Reid, the Senate Majority and Minority Leader for years and years and years, particularly through, his allies in the Culinary Union. They had a great get out the vote operation. Since Reid died a few years ago, it hasn't quite been the same. Biden still won the state in 2020. Hillary Clinton won it in 2016. But it was pretty close in 2020. And some of the biggest economic issues that we see in the body politic seem to be amplified in Nevada. It's a place that suffered mightily, from the pandemic because of its reliance on tourism. It's also has a lower than average rate of education levels, which tend to also give the advantage to Democrats. So, but it's also this incredibly diverse place as well. So, it has a high Asian as well as Hispanic population. It's an interesting place. I grew up in Arizona, right across the border. I still don't understand it very well, but it is always unpredictable and weird to try to figure out what's going to happen. And I think that Democrats are really, they may miss Harry Reid on a personal level and an emotional level because of he was just such a unique individual. But I think they really miss him and his political acumen in the state.
I would agree with that. Nevada looks like a particularly troublesome spot for Biden at the presidential level. He polls worse there than pretty much any other swing state, even places where like Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, that have more Republican history than Nevada, which again has been won by Democrats for the last couple elections. But it's always been close, right? I think every presidential election in Nevada since at least 1988 has been a 5-point race or less. So right. This is a state that likes its close elections. It's also a state that has some, weird quirks politically. They've got this option of none of these candidates, which is kind of an escape hatch for people who show up to vote but don't want to vote for the major party candidates or independents or minor party candidates, and that they basically can register their disapproval. Their vote doesn't actually, if none of these candidates won, it wouldn't. They just go with the guy who got the next highest votes, but they have that option. It's an incredibly transient state, yep. Right? So for someone like Jackie Rosen, she is ostensibly an incumbent, but a decent chunk of the state, maybe as much as half the state, is new since 2018 in terms of the electorate. And so she's going to have to introduce herself as if she is a newcomer to all the people who have just showed up over the last 6 years who have never voted for her before. So she's got her work cut out for her. She's got a lot of money. She's got a good argument to make. It's just a question of how much the political gravity weighs down on her with Biden struggling so much.
Absolutely. Let's jump across the Colorado River then, or Lake Powell, depending on where you are, into Arizona, my home state. The primary there is July 30th. And let's just stick with the Senate because I think that's really the most, it's definitely one of the most interesting and potentially consequential races. Ruben Gallego seems to be cruising, pretty well to the Democratic nomination to run for Senate. He's a House member and has a pretty clear path. On the Republican side, Kari Lake, who ran for governor and lost by a smidge a couple of years ago to Katie Hobbs, and a Republican. She was for years. She was on local TV. She's been the favorite to win the Senate primary there, including garnering the backing of a lot of Washington Republicans. But I was really struck by the fact that Mike Noble at Predictive Insights, which is a polling firm in Arizona, I mean, they're out with a poll, and they showed that Kari Lake still has almost twice as much support for the Republican primary than Mark Lamb, who's a sheriff in Pinal County, which is just south. It's kind of a rural area and bedroom community for Tucson and Phoenix, just south of Maricopa County. Mark Lamb has, around 25%, Kari Lake had like 55% or 54% in their most recent poll. And then the one that came out like just now this week shows her losing ground, like, like 9 points or something like that. And Mike Noble, the polls, kind of spokes and executive, and he said, normally, I just want to read this because it's just so, it's just, you just don't see this stuff. I mean, this is the founder and CEO of this polling firm. Something we don't typically see is an increase in undecided voters this close to primary election day. While Lake remains the front runner, her diminishing lead and the growing number of undecided voters indicate a volatile race. And again, I have rarely seen that myself. Like, you get closer to the election, people make up their mind because they're either tired of thinking about it, or they see enough, as our friend Dave Wasserman over at the Cook Report says, I've seen enough, right? A lot of people have seen enough. Apparently, people in Arizona want to see a little bit more because they're like, what? Like, I thought I got a handle on this, but I don't. What do you make of this? This is a little nutty.
Kari Lake has some issues with Republicans. She's got issues with independents. She has done a number on her own popularity with how she's behaved over the last, year that she was running for governor, and then year and a half since she lost that gubernatorial race. I mean, as recently as last month, she was still filing cases with the United States Supreme Court, arguing that her election, the election that she lost was illegitimate, that she was the rightful winner. She has not let that go. In addition to the, pretty conservative stances that she took in the run up to the 2022 election, which obviously contributed to her loss to Katie Hobbs, who did not run a strong campaign. I mean, let's not sugarcoat it here. Katie Hobbs had some real vulnerabilities, had some weaknesses that Kari Lake ultimately was unable to exploit. And so I think that this poll is emblematic of that issue, but it's also emblematic of the flip side, which is that there's no feasible alternative for Republicans at this point, because Mark Lamb, the Pinal County sheriff, just isn't putting together the kind of campaign to run statewide. I mean, he's got a tenth of the cash on hand that Kari Lake did. I don't think he's advertising on TV at all.
Some of which he's spending on cowboy hats, right? Right?
Yeah, no, he does love his hats. He's not on TV. He doesn't have outside support. He is not well known in the state. Kari Lake has money. She's up on TV. She has universal name ID. Yeah. And that just makes it very challenging. I think if we were talking about Karen Taylor Robeson, if we were talking about Matt Salmon, if we were talking about Kimberly Yee, other more established Republicans who have statewide experience, who have friends in DC, if they were in this primary, now would be the moment where it was getting really interesting.
Right.
But it's notable that even if Kari Lake's support drops 10 points in this poll, Mark Lamb's not seeing the benefit of any of that.
He's not getting a corresponding bounce. Yeah. And
so
I should note too that Pinal County is not like the most the place that you necessarily can launch a statewide campaign and get that kind of universal name recognition. Kari Lake, because she was on on TV in Phoenix for years and years and years. I mean, that's basically most of the state. People in Arizona joke about the state of Maricopa, which is Phoenix and its surrounding area. Pinal County is known for having farms and the state prison. I mean, no knock against it. Oh, and the Tom Mix Memorial. So it's. And I love my home state. I love parts of it, but a sparsely populated rural part of the state is not necessarily the jumping off ground to dethrone somebody who has that kind of profile like Kari Lake does.
Yeah, it's not. It does not seem to be in the cards for Mark Lamb, but that doesn't erase the fact that Kari Lake is not super popular. Right. And that even among Republicans, there are Republicans who are frustrated with her. This is a woman who secretly recorded a conversation with the head of the Republican Party in Arizona and held on to it for a year and then dropped it right before the state GOP convention so that she could get him fired.
How to make friends and influence people, 2024 edition.
I think she will win the primary. I think that it will be a difficult general election for her. At Inside Elections, we moved this race out of toss-up, which is where we've had it since the beginning of the cycle, into the tilt Democratic category because of Kari Lake, because she does not look as viable as a lot of these other Republican challengers, even in these closely divided states.
Speaking of closely divided states, let's jump forward. And just to reiterate, that's a July 30th primary. Oh, and I also should mention that the Nevada Senate race you also have as tilt Democratic at this point, not in toss-up.
Yes. Yes.
Obviously, things can change on the ground, but that's where those two races stand now with Inside Elections. All right, let's jump from July 30th to August 6th, which is the Michigan primary. More drama. Debbie Stabenow, the longtime Democratic senator from Michigan, is retiring. Alyssa Slotkin is kind of on cruise control on the Democratic side of the ledger. I'm sensing a trend here. There is a fairly competitive and also weird primary going on among Republicans in the state. Mike Rogers, the former Michigan Republican congressman, former chairman of the Intelligence Committee, former FBI agent. He's been on TV a lot too, as a paid contributor for some of the cable networks. He has looked like the front runner for a while, but for a little while, Peter Meijer, the former Republican congressman from Western Michigan and the scion of the Meijer grocery store chain, he looked like he might be a front runner, and then they chased him out of town. I don't know, he might be in hiding in Illinois or something now, from the sort of reception that he got. He dropped out, but then Justin Amash, who was a Republican congressman and then became an independent and then a libertarian, and now he's running in the Republican primary too. And it's just let's try and unpack what we're looking at as we approach the August 6th Michigan primary for who might be the nominee to take on Slotkin.
This has been a real doozy of a race, as you alluded to. And the one guy you didn't mention, James Craig, the former Detroit police chief, who jumped into this race early on, was actually the polling frontrunner for a little while before he decided he was going to drop out to think about running for mayor of Detroit. Was, I believe, what he said was his next steps. He was also in the race for a little bit. Nikki Snyder, who is a member of the State Board of Education, she was in the race for a bit, but we're down to three: Mike Rogers, Justin Amash, and Sandy Pensler, who is a financial guy out of Grosse Pointe, I believe, who ran for Senate in 2018, lost the Republican primary to John James, who then went on to lose to Stabenow in that general election. At the moment, it looks like Rogers is in the driver's seat here. He is the most conventional, I would argue, of any Republican Senate candidate running this cycle, with perhaps the exception of Larry Hogan in Maryland. He's a former congressman from a swingy district, national security background. Square-jawed. He looks the part. Right. And he's got an endorsement from Trump, which always helps. He's not a great fundraiser. He's been out of the game for a little bit, and he comes from an era of politics, the 2000s, where you didn't need to raise $20-30 million to run for Senate. And so it's been a little slow for him. What that has done is created the semblance of an opening, perhaps, for Sandy Pensler, who is personally wealthy, has already contributed several $1,000,000 to his own campaign, and is running TV ads trying to chip away at Rogers' support. Amash, I think, has a loyal following among some corners of the state, more libertarian-minded voters, obviously coming out of that Western Michigan area, which really does have its own unique political identity, separate and apart from Detroit area and kind of as you go further up the mitten.
I'm going to anger all people in Michigan now by saying it's a little bit more Chicago than Detroit. At least like the kind of the Gold Coast of Chicago. No, it is. It's wealthy. It's a wealthy part of the state. It's suburban. And kind of almost retreat like. My image of it is people like Fred Upton and Mike Rogers, who and Peter Meyer. I mean, those are the folks who dominated politics there. I mean, I remember like there was this great image, John Paul Stevens, the former Supreme Court justice, who was, famously from Chicago. He had a house in Western Michigan, and he would fly his plane when he was an appellate judge to Chicago across Lake Michigan. So that's it is this, when people hear Michigan, they think different things. I mean, I think that it's just a unique place that is not quite Detroit, you might say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Meyer, had he not done what he did in voting to impeach Trump, would have been a heck of a statewide general election candidate. The guy's young, he has an educational pedigree, he is a military veteran, and he's got a very recognizable last name that, comes with about $1 billion in a trust fund somewhere that he could potentially spend on a Senate run. That last part, I think, has a little bit to do with why he didn't end up running this race, because I don't think he has access to the money yet. But I think that absent that Trump impeachment vote, Peter Meyer looked like the future of the Michigan Republican Party when he was first elected in 2020. Obviously, it didn't go that way, and instead they're going to go to the past of the Republican Party and Mike Rogers, who, again, is the most conventional of any of these guys running for Senate. But that does mean he's going to have to deal with the votes he took on Medicare and Medicaid and the Bush and Social Security and the Bush administration.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, all these things that people don't really think about anymore, but were very politically salient 15 years ago.
Patriot Act, FISA reauthorization. Yeah, he's got a record.
Yeah. The Democrats are going to have a heyday with it. Even Pensler. I mean, Pensler's been litigating some stuff off his chairmanship of the Intelligence Committee around the Benghazi hearings and things like that. So again, I anticipate Rogers will be the nominee here, but it's going to be a tough fight against Slotkin. She's, like you said, on cruise control in her primary. She's one of the top fundraisers in the Democratic Party. She also has a pretty compelling backstory and is a pretty ruthless politician. So I think that she's going to be a strong standard bearer for Democrats come November.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't remember. I'm sure there are plenty of examples, but I can't remember a time when, if it is a Rogers Slotkin matchup, when two people so plugged into the intelligence and national security apparatus were working. Because she's a former CIA analyst. He's a former intelligence chairman, an FBI agent. I mean, talk about deep state. Right. This has got to be a nightmare for people who worry about mock helicopters and so forth.
That's a good question. If we've ever had like an FBI agent and a CIA officer run against each other in a race, that would be, we'll put that to Twitter, see if anyone knows the answer.
All right, let's switch gears to some of the big McGillas there. On the presidential scene, we obviously have the conventions. Like the Republican convention in Milwaukee, July 15th through the 19th. The Democratic convention in Chicago. It's an all Midwest convention scene. The Democratic convention in Chicago will be August 19th through the 23rd. No real big surprise about who the nominees will be, but the way that when people say like, oh, there's nothing happening, like who cares what Trump says, or who cares what Biden says in the speech? Like, no, these are political trade shows. This is where everybody who's interested in politics, everybody who wants a career in politics, everybody who wants a future in politics shows up to try to, kind of gauge things, whether you're some, mayor somewhere, or whether you're a United States senator, or whether, this is an important gathering for both, for both parties. And it's going to be, there might be some drama, who knows, with what happens, particularly on the Republican side, if, depending on who just speaks, right? I mean, like, there have been plenty of people who have been eating a lot of crow and saying they're going to vote for Trump after they said they would never, support him, like Nikki Haley this week. Are they, when Ted Cruz gave his speech in Cleveland after, after challenging Trump for the nomination in 2016, he was booed. I mean, so we could see a lot of drama with these conventions.
There's definitely the potential for drama. There always is when you gather a couple thousand very politically active people and lock them in a room together for 3 days. It creates the environment for fireworks. Certainly, the things that I'm thinking about are the potential for protests at the Democratic convention in Chicago. Obviously, a lot of conventions in Chicago.
Little history there with the Democrats in Chicago and political protests. Yes.
Yes. They are inviting a lot of unfavorable historical comparisons depending on how things go there, especially with expected protests over the war in Gaza. That, I think, will be an interesting factor, how much media attention that gets and how voters perceive the relative order or chaos that is associated with the Democratic Party as they are putting on this big event. I will be watching that for sure. I think that the speech that Biden gives is going to be incredibly important. I think back to 2020 when Biden was facing a lot of the same questions that he is now about his fitness for the job. There is a significant contingent of voters who simply believe that he is too old. Whether or not they believe that he is, mentally sharp or not, I think is a subset of that question. But I think there are probably a bunch of voters who think he is mentally sharp enough, but just too old. A speech like a convention speech, which is long and it's uninterrupted, and this one in front of an audience, an adoring audience, is going to be incredibly important for Biden to demonstrate that he still has a fastball, that he still can rally the troops around him in his campaign. He did that successfully in 2020. I think he gave a speech that quieted a lot of nerves about his candidacy in that year. And so it's a real opportunity for him moving forward from August. And then, the other speeches, like you said, and I'm not so much, I think, whether Haley speaks or, Mike Pence or something like that. I think Pence is still holding out. He hasn't said he's going to vote for Trump, but also the next generation, right? Neither of these guys is going to be able to run for another term in 2028. And so which potential candidates in that year give well-regarded speeches? I mean, we talk still, we're 20 years out from the red states and blue states speech that Obama gave at the 2004 convention. And I will be very interested to see, the speeches that I'm sure Josh Shapiro, Gretchen Whitmer, Jared Polis, Wes Moore, all those potential 2028 candidates are going to give, how they're received, what the reaction is, because there's a lot of very early groundwork being laid, and this is kind of the big moment on stage for a lot of these people.
And we'll also get a little sneak peek with the presidential debate that's scheduled for June 27th between Trump and Biden. Assuming it happens, I am skeptical that there won't be some sort of snafu. I mean, certainly, I don't want to spend really a lot of time on the Trump trials, but if there's a verdict the day before in the Trump trial in Manhattan, I can't imagine that. I don't know, that may affect like, whether Trump shows up. It's just, but like, let's assume that it happens. This will be the first time that these two guys have been in the same room since, the debate where Trump had COVID at their debate, and then ended up in the hospital a couple of days later. This, regardless of what our expectations are, or what, how many interruptions there may be, like between this will be a big deal. This is to take the sporting, metaphors. I mean, this would be like not even Ali Frazier 3. This would be like Ali Frazier 4 in a fictional universe, where they're like they're like obviously shouldn't have the gloves up too high.
It was really interesting to see Biden be the first mover on these debates, especially with the updated calendar. Typically, historically, for the last 40 years, debates have been a September and October affair.
Yeah.
And now they're starting in June. I mean, you said June 21st was the beginning of summer, and it's like we got June 21st, and then not even a week later, we've got a presidential debate, which is insane. I mean, that is in a month and 4 days that we're going to be doing presidential debates, and to kind of reiterate what I was speaking on with the convention, this is a really important moment for Biden because, again, people think he's too old for the job. That is the number one thing people say about him. And I happen to believe that kind of belief informs a lot of the other dissatisfaction that people have with Biden. They're less willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on the economy, on the border, on on any issue really outside of abortion and election integrity, because they just don't think that he's up to the job. And if he can get out there, like he has done with every one of his State of the Unions so far as president, and go toe to toe with Trump, and exceed the very low expectations that Trump has set for him, and a lot of the Republicans and a lot of folks in the media have set for him, I think that's going to be good for him. That's going to allow him to yank the narrative back into his control. And I think that's why he's doing it so early. That's why he wants to do it now.
Yeah, it does. It is this sort of trap that Trump and other Republicans have laid for themselves by portraying, Biden as this crooked, drooling, dementia-ridden moron if he comes out and holds his own. I mean, he doesn't even have to win the debate. He doesn't even have to strike him out looking, again, more sports metaphors. But he could just be okay. And that would be, people would say like, oh, wait a second, he's not drooling.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And we go through this every year at the State of the Union, where Biden gets up there and he gives a very energetic speech, and he, goes back and forth with some Republicans who are heckling him in the crowd, and everyone, he gets a little bump. And that's, that clearly that is something that works for him. I think the first debate, the COVID debate in 2020 was a similar episode where expectations were very low for Biden. He got out there. Trump kind of went off the rails in that debate. He was probably already feeling a little bit bad from the COVID, but he went after Biden's sons. He kept interrupting. Poor Chris Wallace was really struggling to maintain any sort of decorum in that debate. Biden got a few zingers in. He had a really heartfelt moment talking about addiction and his son Hunter, and speaking kind of directly to American people, most of whom probably know someone who has suffered from addiction at some point in their lives. I thought that was a really powerful moment for Biden. And he thrived off of that kind of contrast with Trump, who was being his typical boisterous self. And so I think that there's a lot of upside for Biden in the debates. I really don't. And I feel like I'm the only guy in DC who feels this way. And I've been saying this for a while. I've always thought Biden was going to debate, because I really do think that the expectations, the bar has been set so low for him that he's got to be able to clear it. And it's a really easy way for him to demonstrate some kind of baseline strength to voters who might be a little skittish.
One last thing about the presidential race before we just touch on some of the court cases that we're expecting then will be big political news is that the Ohio legislature adjourned this week without carving out a sort of an exception so that Biden could be on the ballot in Ohio. This is usually a kind of a minor procedural snafu. Like the issue is that the ballots have to be set by August 15th. The Democratic convention isn't until the week after that. This happens. It happens frequently. It happened in 2012 with both candidates, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. It happened in 2016 with Trump, that they didn't get an official nominee from the convention until after ballots were set by statute. This time, the Ohio Secretary of State says he's not going to do an exception, that it was up to the legislature. The legislature couldn't get it done. So we might see, again, a court case. Maybe this is a good transition to the other court cases. But as of right now, it seems like Biden won't be on the ballot. And in Ohio, which again is not I don't think anybody was thinking that Biden could win Ohio this time around. It's certainly trended away from Democrats the last few years. But who knows what the effect could be if Biden isn't on the ballot? If there's a big write-in campaign, does that help Democrats? Because they'd obviously be the only ones organizing something like that. Seems like a weird, chaotic situation that bears keeping an eye on.
That's exactly right. I'm skeptical that it will happen this way, that Biden won't be on the ballot. I'm very curious how that would affect the Sherrod Brown campaign and the 3 competitive House districts: Ohio 1, Greg Landsman in Cincinnati, Ohio 9, Marcy Kaptur in Toledo, and Ohio 13, Amelia Sykes in kind of the Akron, Cleveland area. I'm not sure how that would all play out. But I think a lot of this can be chalked up to Frank LaRose's desperate need to be accepted into the Republican fold, and the more kind of Trump-oriented Republican fold, after briefly standing up to Trump and kind of the questions of election integrity during the 2020 race. I think that Frank LaRose desperately wants to be either governor or senator at some point in his career, and he has not been able to consolidate support within the Republican Party, especially from the MAGA wing. We saw him pretty much fail spectacularly in the 2024 Senate primary. I think he came in third. He never really got off the ground, couldn't raise any money. We saw him fail to get the changes to the rules about passing ballot measures across the finish line in Ohio, and then the subsequent abortion measure. He was the face of both of those efforts for Republicans. Neither of them succeeded. This is a guy who's just grasping for something that's going to make him more attractive to more hardline Republicans. And this is the latest thing for him. And so, of course, he's going to take the opportunity. And I imagine maybe deep down what he wants is for the courts to step in and say, no, you got to put on Biden on the ballot. And then he can, be the martyr and say, the evil deep state, courts are forcing me to do this, but I'm trying to stick up, for the rule of law. There's a governor's race in 2 years, But I don't know. It's so, look, Alabama had this. Alabama made it so that Biden could be on the ballot there. That was not
the same issue. Yeah. And it wasn't close either. It was like, the House was like 100-0 or something like that.
Republicans went through this with Colorado a couple months ago when the Colorado State Supreme Court kicked Trump off the ballot in that state. And there was a huge uproar from Republicans about, how dare anyone but the voters decide who gets to be on the ballot in any presidential election. And of course, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, no, Colorado, you can't exclude Trump from the ballot. I don't know if it'll be the Supreme Court, whether it'll be the Ohio State Supreme Court, whether, a district judge will hand down an opinion and LaRose will say, I don't want to do it, but I got to follow the court's orders, or how it will end up. But I would be very surprised if Biden is not on the ticket in Ohio. I'm trying to think of the last time. I mean, I think Johnson maybe wasn't on in 64 in 68. Maybe Humphrey wasn't on the ticket in like Mississippi or Alabama. I think there have been a few cases where Southern Democratic states in the Jim Crow era refused to put the National Democratic nominee on the ballot in their states, but I don't think it's ever happened in the modern political era.
No, it'd be a real stretch. Speaking of the courts, I want to wrap up on this, and we don't need to spend a lot of time because we don't know what the opinions are going to be, but we have 4 pretty big Supreme Court opinions coming down. In addition to whatever happens with the trials against Menendez and Trump in New York. But at the Supreme Court level, we've got 2 abortion cases and 2 that concern Donald Trump. The 2 abortion cases are whether the FDA exceeded its authority in approving mifepristone to be shipped across state lines. I mean, this is abortion medication that's used in the majority of abortions in the United States. They heard that case in April. It'll be one of the last opinions rolled out this before the term is over in late June, early July. And then another at heart, an emergency room abortion case that comes from Idaho about whether federal law, which requires that measures be taken, including that could possibly include D&C instructions and so forth, or abortions or something resembling an abortion, be provided to women seeking care in an emergency room. Idaho says that they don't have to do that, and this would apply to other states that don't have an exception for the life of the mother. And in a case of abortion, that decision is going to come down as well before the end of the term. And then the 2 Trump cases concern, one, his claim of absolute immunity as president from criminal charges, and another relating to obstruction of official proceedings, which would affect the January 6 cases. So, I mean, Supreme Court always has an outsized set of influences, but we actually did see in 2022 that the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe versus Wade, likely had an outsized effect in helping Democrats avoid a total wipeout in congressional elections. What's your thoughts on whether we're up at that stage or not with these 4 pretty big cases?
I think that of the 4, the mifepristone case seems like it has the most potential to become a real political issue, just because it's the most of the 2 abortion cases. I think it's the more clearly explainable one, and it's the one that I think more people have regular contact with, right? I would imagine the number of people who have or are or will use those medications is significantly higher than the number of people who end up in emergency rooms in red states, right? Because that's one is about mailing anywhere and one is about specifically showing up at a hospital. Yeah, I mean, I think that abortion and reproductive access is still one of Democrats' best issues. It is both a persuasion issue and a turnout issue. We have seen that it gets voters into the polls, and it takes more moderate voters, suburban voters, independent voters, Republican-leaning women, and turns them off of Republican candidates who are not supportive of abortion access. And I look to that Alabama decision about IVF, right, and about kind of this question of whether frozen fertilized embryos are considered people. And I look at the special election that happened in a pretty Republican district in Alabama right after that decision came down and the big Democratic victory we saw there. And I think that there is clearly such frustration, such anger, and such motivation surrounding this issue for Democrats. And you will get every Republican in the country will get asked about whether they agree or disagree with the decision. And it's going to have an immediate impact on people's lives, right? There's going to be a trickle, a drip, drip, drip of stories, as there has been every month since Dobbs, of the domino effects of a ruling of that scope. So absolutely, I think of all of the cases, that is the one that could potentially be politically the biggest. I think the two Trump cases are very important, right? From a governance standpoint, from a legal perspective, and from the perspective of what is going to happen to this guy if he loses the election. Because if he loses the election, the next day he is going to be facing three, I guess, because this New York case will be done. He'll be facing minimum 3 very serious criminal prosecutions in 3 different jurisdictions that he will no longer have any protection for if he loses the election and the Supreme Court doesn't give him a lifeline here. But I don't think that from a political standpoint, because the trials aren't going to happen before the election anyways, I don't really think that it's going to make as much of a difference, especially because the Biden campaign would much rather be talking about abortion than they would be about Trump's legal issues. I mean, they really don't like talking about it. It's kind of
and also the Trump stuff just sort of, it takes care of itself because it's just wall to wall, coverage. I mean, I don't know if you saw some of the headlines that Fox, CNN, MSNBC, their ratings are going through the roof, because of this trial. But I agree. I mean, the democracy stuff, the democratic integrity or election integrity and immunity, it seems to fit into partisan boxes. The abortion stuff, it has a wide bipartisan effect. So.
Yeah, no, and I just it doesn't seem like the Biden campaign wants to talk about. They would rather talk about Build Back Better and infrastructure and abortion and things like that than January 6th and Trump's role in everything that led up to that. Maybe that changes. Maybe that changes as we get closer to Election Day, but. Yeah, I'm just not sure that those cases will have as much political impact.
Well, Jacob, I think we've done hopefully our readers, our subscribers and our viewers and our listeners have a sense of just how busy the summer could be. But I mean, I wanted to make sure people knew that they had this coast to sort of surf on as they headed to the beach or wherever you're headed for Memorial Day weekend. So thanks for talking about it. And, we'll see you the next time. And, I think this is a great outline. Went a little longer than we normally do, but there was a lot to cover. So I thank you very much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.